Hi, everyone. I'm Alex at Hatched Analytics. So what do we do at Hatched? We operate in this space called alternative data. I don't know how many of people are familiar with alternative data. Not too many. Well, maybe some. OK, that's great. So basically what we do is we work with clients in the financial services space, so hedge funds, asset managers. And we help our clients make better investment decisions with our data, right? The company has been around for 6 years. So this is a picture from last year. It wasn't my 5th birthday. It was our company's 5th birthday. So we like to think that we know this space quite well. We work with some of the very large, some of the largest hedge funds in this space. Currently have about 30 clients. But we're actually relatively new to web scraping. So I joined our company last year. And I drive a number of initiatives in this space. And so web scraping is one of those initiatives. So just to make it clear, currently, we haven't actually productized any of our web scraping projects. So why am I here? Just wanted to share kind of our journey so far. I think it's going to be a bit like a therapy session for myself. I want to share some of the pains that we've experienced. It hasn't just been roses and butterflies, but we had some successes as well. So as a way of introducing myself, my background is I'm a bit of a data geek, and I like playing with data even in my spare time. So to introduce the concept of alternative data and introduce myself, I wanted to share a bit of a story, a project from some time ago. So this is a share price of a company from 2016. And you can see that the share price has been very volatile. Maybe some of you can try to guess which company it is. What's that? GameStop. Yeah, so this is from before that. I give you a hint. Maybe some of you have kids, or maybe you were a kid in 2016. I don't know.
Toys R Us.
Toys R Us. OK, that's kind of close. All right, I'll give you the answer. So this is the share price of Nintendo. And maybe some of you remember something that happened that year was Pokemon Go was released, right? It was a huge hit. Basically, I remember it wasn't just kids playing that game. Like many people in our office, where the place where I work, everyone was playing that game. And as you can see, like the share price was very volatile. I was a data geek. I really wanted to try to find some interesting data set to look at. At the time, I was actually working with some clients in the gaming industry. And the thing about the gaming industry, like when a new game comes out, it's kind of a big question. Like, OK, maybe many people are playing that game, but very quickly people lose interest as well. So the attention span is very short. Everyone wants to know like about the next Minecraft, some game that's going to last for a long time. But very often people just like move from one game to another really quickly. So I found this website, a third-party website, where people can basically just go and submit every time. So the way the game works is you basically walk around with your iPhone and you try to catch these Pokemon Go monsters. And basically, somebody built these community websites where everyone can just go and submit information about the monster that they've seen or they managed to catch. So, of course, me being kind of a bit of a data geek and also being curious about the game, right-click on the website. The data is presented as a map, but of course, there's like an underlying JSON data. There is some kind of an API. So I managed to download the data set. First thing that I did was just plotted everything on a big map. I was really curious about how the game was spreading. So every submission, you basically have coordinates, latitude and longitude, and also a timestamp, right? And also like the information about the person. You don't know their details, but you see the ID of that unique person, right? So of course, I was curious. I kind of did a bit of geospatial analysis. I mapped every single point to a country. You see the data set is a little bit messy. Once again, you have some data points like in the middle of the ocean, or obviously there's like invalid data. But once I was able to put the data on a map, I can now start analyzing how the game was spreading between different countries. You can see like the first countries that where the game was really popular was US. Then maybe like a day later was United Kingdom, then Germany. And then some other countries, like specifically Brazil. You can see that the game was picked up like a few weeks after the rest of the world. I thought it was really interesting. Later, I found out, initially I thought it was some kind of a cultural thing. Actually, it turns out that the game was released in stages. So the reason why it was popular in Brazil 3 weeks after the rest of the world is just because the game was released much later, right? So generally when we see things like that in the data, it's actually a good sign. We kind of have some quirks in the data that can be explained by the actual kind of news from the company itself, right? So there is a good evidence that our data is valid. So if we put these two data sets together, so if we look at the share price and the number of these submissions, one thing you can observe is like the interest in the game was dropping, but the share price was still going up. So there was a bit of a lag in how the market reacted to the news. There were also some other things happening at the same time. Like I think people realized that Nintendo then actually fully owned their IP. But I think this is just an illustration of what alternative data is, right? If you're an investor, you generally don't want to wait until the company would report their quarterly results, right? You kind of want to have some edge in the market. That basically means that you kind of want to see that signal almost like as soon as possible, or you want to have more information that other people have, and that basically gives you edge. So fast forward to this year, we kind of had these ideas for some of the projects that we wanted to kind of go from just collecting data to productizing them. And what are some of the things that we have to consider? So first thing we need to think about is what do our clients actually need? You would be surprised to know, but generally, like in our space, people don't want data. They actually want answers to the questions. So if I'm an investor in a gaming company, maybe I want to know something like daily active users or revenue, or how does revenue this quarter compares to revenue from like the same quarter last year, or how is this company doing against the competition. So we have a team of analysts who basically go from these like raw data sets and we try to turn it into something that's meaningful to investors, right? And one observation I have in general with web scraping, many people really focus on pricing. And pricing is kind of hard to map to like a meaningful KPI that the company would report themselves. Usually there is no ground truth. Like companies wouldn't report pricing, right? You don't even know if it's valid or not. Maybe you go after discounts and heavy discounting suggests that maybe the company is not performing that well, but it's kind of it's a hypothesis. Like we don't know if it's true or not. So we always try to go beyond just pricing when we run these projects. Next thing I would say is data must have history. So this is just an example of one of our projects where we give our estimates on Zalando. Zalando is this European fashion retailer, and you can see that we have like 5 years worth of history in our report. And this is specifically a challenge with web scraping. So what we find is with some other data sets, sometimes you can go back in time. With web scraping, like there is usually no time machine. Basically, you start scraping your data, and there is a very long ROI before you can actually turn it into a product. And generally, clients expect at least, I would say, a couple of years worth of history before we can actually productize this data. So you have to be very, very patient when you launch these projects. Coverage. You have to think about who the client is. So generally, we deal with like portfolio managers or analysts, and they typically will cover like a whole vertical. So even if we find some amazing signal, like Nintendo, for example, right, they would expect more than just one company before they would even be interested in your product. So that's something to keep in mind as well. You kind of have to think in advance. And one company or one signal is usually just not enough. Compliance, I know we have a separate session on compliance specifically, but I think it's in our industry is probably more important, I would say, maybe than compared to some other industries. One thing to understand about alternative data is the end client is like liable, basically, right? So whenever we launch a project, we have to go through a specific due diligence process with our clients. We actually work with a third-party legal firm who literally like revise our methodology for how we collect data. And going back to the Nintendo example, by the way, like those data points submitted by users, those users didn't give us their consent to use the data, right? So we will actually, probably this would be a no-go if we wanted to turn it into like a commercial product. There is a big gap between doing like a little hobby project collecting data and launching it as a commercial product. Lastly, I would say unique and proprietary data. So something that's, again, maybe unique to our industry. There is this thing called alpha decay. Basically what it means is the more people use the data set, the less valuable it becomes because like it's basically already priced in, right? So kind of the one reason I would say why our company has been successful, we often offer like differentiated view of companies' performance. And so for that reason, for example, when we think about build versus buy, we have to take this into the account, right? We wouldn't just go and buy a ready-made data set that's already been commoditized and might be available from some marketplaces, right? We want to find something that's relatively unique and gives you a unique perspective. Right, so I'm a techie, just want to say a few words about plumbing. I think we have some technical people in the audience. They might be interested to see that. So this is, our pipeline has evolved. One thing to mention is we have a very small team, literally 2 people working on this project. And this is not even full time. We have other projects as well. So we have to be very pragmatic with how we manage these things. So we actually have a hybrid model where some of the data we collect ourselves. So we run some scrapers, basically if we can get away with running a curl-like scraper in an EC2 instance, that's the cheapest way of collecting data. Sometimes we can get away with it. Sometimes we use a purpose-built cloud-based platform for scraping. And in some cases, we just basically have to admit that we're not experts in this field. All this anti-ban stuff that people were talking about all day today, we basically go to a third-party company who would help us with more complex projects. But it doesn't really matter how the data is collected. It always ends up in our S3 bucket. So we try to standardize the data as much as we can. And we also use something called Snowflake. So we actually have to really think about not just how the data is being collected, but also how easy it is to analyze it. And in some cases, we want to run queries on hundreds of billions or billions of rows, right? So you kind of have to have a purpose-built platform for something like that. So the rest of the stack is relatively standard. We use Python, Pandas. We use Playwright. So nothing that's truly unique. One thing I would say is, as our architecture has evolved, there are different costs involved in all of this. And what we find is storage costs are actually really hitting us hard, basically. So if you think about it, so you have, for example, network costs or compute costs or proxy costs. So that's something that you pay for on a monthly basis, right? So let's say if we use that much network traffic in a month, this is how much we're paying for. With storage, it's a little bit different. You're paying for whatever you collected last month, and you're also paying for whatever you collected prior to that. So it's cumulative cost that just keeps growing. And we really have to think about what is the most efficient way of how we can store this data. So you might notice we start compressing all our data. We don't use raw CSV files in our S3. We stopped ingesting all of our data, so we only ingest. In the beginning, we basically were ingesting everything into Snowflake, but it was just too expensive. We basically were storing all our data twice. We no longer do this. So basically, we store everything in S3, and then we only ingest whatever we need for a specific project. And one table we have in Snowflake is specifically designed for monitoring. I just want to talk about that. So I think other people talked about alerts and things like that. So we have alerts as well. But my background is data visualization. I really believe in visualizing data. I think it really helps us spot any data quality issues. So this is just an example of a dashboard we have. It's like a rolling 1-week view of whatever data has been collected. And basically, this is a bird's eye view. So if there is a dot, means we successfully collected something. If there is a gap, OK, that needs our attention. So we built this using Tableau on top of a Snowflake table. And we don't even log into Tableau. So we actually get a snapshot of this dashboard in our Teams Messenger. And we just receive that every day. So just the most efficient way we can do this. And then if we need more detail, when we really care about, let's say, the number of products being collected, and we expect that number to be consistent from day to day or from week to week, we basically build this bar chart. And whenever we see that there is a gap, or let's say this particular day we collected 10% less than the prior day, again, we can visually spot that. And some projects that we really care about, high-value projects, we look at more granular category-based data, right? So for example, every week, we expect a certain number of products in a specific category. And if there is a 0, OK, that needs our attention. We have to go and look at that. So we basically just build these dashboards. I think it's a good solution. It really works for us quite well, I would say. Right, so just summarize. There are some really kind of nuanced business consideration you have to put into productizing web scrape data and turning it into a appealing alternative data product. You have to think about uniqueness of your data, compliance, how to answer investors' question. You have to think about the history. Technical stack, like in our case, we have to be really pragmatic and try to standardize as much as we can, but nothing is set in stone, so our stack is evolving. Lastly, I would say we're growing. So the picture of our company I had in the beginning, the company is now actually twice as big. But right now, we're not hiring, actually. But please follow us on LinkedIn if you have relevant skills. And if you are a client in this space, we have a reputation of being good at finding like signals that other people couldn't find. So please let us know, especially if you're interested in a company that's like outside of the US, you know, that cannot be easily tracked using credit card data. Yeah, please reach out to us. We'll very likely be able to help. All right, thanks.
I'm fascinated with the monitoring piece. So I do have a question on that. I don't know if anybody else is going to have some questions. But one of the things, you know, like, so monitoring, as you showed it, was, you know, it's very visual. You know, you can, you know, human can see it. Do you have any false positive problems with this to identify, you know, where, you know, you actually don't have holes or you get false alerts or any of that stuff? How have you tackled some of those challenges?
I would say that's actually the reason why we went with data visualization as our approach. I think more standard alerting, one thing that tends to happen is people get this alert fatigue. You just get too many alerts and you stop reacting to them. Because, like, I know the nature of web scraping, like sometimes you have to do multiple retries before you get your data. So we just don't want to be alerted too many times, and we only want to react to things that actually matter to us. And in the end of the day, we care about like how many projects did we collect, and so data visualization, in my opinion, is a good way of doing it.
Okay, great. I also have some questions on, you know, your view on where extraction is going to go in the next while, and you know, and if I build on that. And my question that I've been asking kind of everybody, you know, if there was one thing that you could make kind of disappear, you know, in this, you know, whole, you know, pipeline, what would it be? So it's kind of a two-parter there.
Disappear, I'm not sure, but like one thing I would, like in my dreams, one thing I would like to see is more standardization around compliance specifically. What tends to happen is like different clients have different requirements. And we kind of have to go with the lowest common denominator. So if people want us to respect robots.txt, we have to do it, right? So, but you know, if you speak to different legal people, they might have slightly different legal opinion on that. So I just wish there was like some standard around it. We had to create our own guidelines. There was so European Union Commission of Statistics. Interestingly enough, they do their own scraping and they publish some like frameworks. I would say just because the government is doing it doesn't necessarily mean it's like legal, I would say, but it's a good starting point. So we kind of use that for our guidelines.
Cool, right, we have a few questions. So we'll go from the top. Are you generally estimating the revenue of competitors based on historic data?
So yeah, generally we estimate some KPIs that are kind of meaningful to investors. We don't do historical forecasting, so we do something called nowcasting, I guess. Like whenever we see on our data, we then try to model KPI based off of that. That's generally our approach.
Okay, and what about the, you know, this classic problem of, you know, the detecting, it's kind of like, I suppose it's related to the monitoring and alerting one, but, you know, the quality of data and detecting problems in the extracted data, you know, what do you use there, tools or any other techniques?
Maybe we're not that advanced, but like saying that, like I said already, like we're quite happy with our solution. Like even the third-party company that we work with, we kind of, I would say we're quite good at like spotting any data quality issues when, you know, with the data that comes from them. So.
Alrighty, and on a similar kind of point, is there any different view on the, I suppose, removing noise from web scrape data? It's kind of a similar question.
I wouldn't say we have a lot of noise, maybe data duplication, but I would say it's like data, we're hoping to achieve some of that with our data analysis. So kind of with our stack, when I was talking about it, you know, data engineers will understand this. There are two approaches, ETL and ELT. So currently the way we do things, we basically store data kind of in a relatively raw format, and then we do like transformations and cleaning afterwards. So but we know that we can always go back in case something's not quite right.
Okay, and we might as well ask the last question. It's a very similar one from Assad. He's on a theme here. You know, oh, it's gone. Question is gone. Can we get it back again? I didn't read it all. Nope. There we go. Oh, no. Oh, we have a new one. Okay. All right, we'll ask this question then. Okay, yeah, that's a good one. You know, predicting events. Have any good examples?
Yeah, I didn't go too much into detail like on this. So generally, like the chart that I had, where I tried to correlate like Pokemon Go monsters with the share price, it's actually a bad idea because there are too many moving parts in the market. Generally, we never try to predict the share price, right? We kind of leave it to our clients to do that. So we're really focusing on is trying to predict KPIs. And because we focus on KPIs that companies report, they can always, like, we're being measured on the accuracy of our estimates. And that's the benchmark that we have. And yeah, with some of the projects, we have been really successful. But just again, to make it clear, our current projects are not based on web scraping data. So web scraping for us is still relatively new. We're hoping to get there one day.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much. And I really like the monitoring tools. So yeah, thanks for that.